Now, the Reynolds Affair, note, was sort of my triumph. And I want to tell some stories about it. It's the one time the Hamilton-Jefferson controversy really did enter the office. I had started working on the Reynolds Affair in 1797 when someone, and I don't recall who, called Syrett and said that Julian Boyd, the editor of the Jefferson Papers, had printed a letter, and in the annotations he said that Hamilton was guilty of financial misconduct and had not had an affair with Maria Reynolds. And his evidence for this was that he could not validate Hamilton's description of who Maria Reynolds was. Well, Hamilton may have done a lot of things, but he was scrupulously honest. And his public reputation was so important to him. And I looked at this and said, it really can't be. So I went off on the hunt. Okay, couldn't find anything. But this was the old days of research. Now, those of you who know the Dewey Decimal System, oh, okay. You could go into the stacks and find U.S. history, and then within that you could find the states alphabetically, and within each state you could find each county alphabetically. So I went to Dutchess County in New York. I put all the books down, I sat on the floor in the stacks, and I started to go through them. And all of a sudden, I found something called the Dutchess County Historical Society Yearbook. The pages had not even been opened. My dear friend, the archivist over here, is going to have a heart attack. I took out a key, and I started to slit open the pages. Now, there were articles in there. There were also the sorts of miscellany you get in these local yearbooks, you know, the 4th of July picnic menu, the listing of the militia. And there, all of a sudden, was a page that said, Reynolds Family Bible. And what it was the inside cover of the family Bible with, as so many families did then, all births, deaths, marriages recorded. And there she was. Exactly who he said she was. Exactly the descent he gave for her. I continue, there were only 2 copies of the yearbook in the stacks at Columbia. I opened them all. I found a couple of other things in a second book, and I flew back to the office, and I said, he was wrong. He was wrong. Well, Syrett wasn't there. He was down in his office at the City University. His wife was there, of course, because Patsy and I worked so well together. She said, call him. I said, he's in a meeting. She said, I don't care. Call him. Now, Syrett could be 2 slightly different people. He was much more formal at City University. With us, it was a very informal, teasing, open kind of relationship. So I called and said, I need to talk to him. And his secretary said, oh, but he's in a meeting. And Patsy Syrett yelled out, tell her to get him out. So she got him out, and I told him what happened. And he said, I will be there. I don't know how he got up that fast, from 42nd to 116th, but he made it. And he just kept staring at it, and he said, this is truly a unique find. It may not change the course of history, but this is something nobody had found before. Now I was really into it. Okay, so now I'm doing all of this, and little bits and pieces of things come back to you. You know, sometimes you have to let the dust settle a little bit. So as I was working on the Reynolds Affair, a couple of things always bothered us. And you can see, these are letters to John Knowlton. John was our representative in D.C. John did all the legwork for us in D.C. He was the manuscripts librarian at the Library of Congress. We paid John a munificent $2.50 an hour to run around and do research for us. And John put all the 250s in a separate fund, and when the project was over, he took me to dinner. It was very nice. But I was looking through the Reynolds Affair material, and You know, James Thompson Callender, who published the accusations in 1797, there was some talk about the fact that he had published them in separate tracts. And that's what we were asking John to try to find, because we could only find the published pamphlet. We've never found the individual separate publications. But here I was looking for all of these letters between James Reynolds and Hamilton, and we couldn't find anything. And originals. And finally, I remembered that in 1795, when Hamilton almost fought another duel, he had prepared a will. And someplace in that will it said something about the Reynolds Papers, so we went back. And the copy we had was one of those old white on black copies, very hard to read. But we could see a little scrawl. So we went back to the original. And sure enough, it said in that will, a bundle of papers labeled JR, tied with a blue ribbon. And next to it, in Elizabeth Hamilton's handwriting, it said in pencil, to be retained by myself. And we suspect she destroyed them. The years after the Reynolds Affair were frustrating for Hamilton. He accepted the appointment, he wanted the appointment as Inspector General during the quasi-war with France. Here again, military. Probably this had something to do with his adulation for Washington as well. Washington agreed to head the force, but only if there was actually a war. And he left the organizing of the army to Hamilton. Now this generated hundreds of letters of recommendation for people to become officers, correspondence with leading Federalists in every state, lists that went back and forth among them saying this guy's good, this guy's not good, use him, don't use him. It was a massive effort. All of these letters were very repetitious, and a lot of the same things went back and forth to people. And Syrett made a decision to calendar these letters and not to print all of them. But they are now all available online. And if there is some graduate student out there who's interested in demographic history and the whole history of the Federalist Party, it is in these documents because the reasons why people were recommended were fascinating. It could say, so-and-so should have become an officer because he has past experience and he served in these capacities. That made sense. Sometimes it said he should get an appointment because his father is important in local politics. That made sense. But then sometimes it just said, tall, looks good on horse. That doesn't seem quite so valid. But we had a lot of this, and you can find these lists which Hamilton maybe sent to Pickering, and Pickering would respond in his handwriting. Then it would go to somebody else, and you'd have another handwriting, and then Hamilton's handwriting. This is a massive body of documentation that somebody should access, but it wasn't going to be us. One item does stand out for me, though. Hamilton's essays were incredibly accurate. When he quoted, when he cited, when he gave facts, we couldn't find a fault. In 1798, he published a series of essays called The Stand. These were in support of the creation of an army to fight France in case we went to war. And in the second one he wrote, it appeared from contemporary testimony that one of the first acts of that assembly, French Revolutionary Assembly, which dethroned the king, was that it declared itself a committee of insurrection of the whole human race for the purpose of overthrowing all existing governments. This quote stands out for me because it is the only thing we could never verify. Of all of the things in Hamilton's correspondence, this is the one quotation we could never find. Syrett and I read the French Revolutionary Parliament procedures in French. I swear to you, Mrs. Goldberg, back in my high school, was having a heart attack. We went through it in French. We went through newspapers from the time in French and in English. We hired someone to go through French sources for us. We could never find it. And to this day, I tell you that the fault is ours, not Hamilton's. We just haven't hit upon the right source. But that, when I was preparing for today, and I said, what was the one thing we couldn't find? It amazed me that like that. I knew the date and I knew when and I could remember it because it stood on a shelf with all of our notebooks ready to go to the printer with one little lone flag sticking up saying this is still a problem. And finally he looked at me and said, we gotta let it go. We can't hold up the whole thing just for this one document. We let it go.